Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll now begin our panel. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you all today to Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation, Realities from Across the Globe, which is our first panel to kick off OCIC's International Development Week 2023. My name is Elizabeth Tuck, and I'm one of OCIC's Community Engagement Coordinators. Today's panelists will be speaking in English and French, and this session will be conducted with simultaneous French and English interpretation. To listen to the interpretation on a computer, locate the globe icon along the bottom row of your Zoom screen and select your language channel. If you are joining via the Zoom app on a mobile device, you can click More on the bottom right corner of your screen, select Language Interpretation, and then choose your language. If you need any support on technical issues relating to interpretation, please use the chat box to message tech support. And please note this session is also being recorded. Please note that closed captioning is available for this session and can be accessed by clicking on the Show Captions option in Zoom. You're also able to move the transcript text box around on your screen. Throughout the event, please feel free to ask questions for the speakers using the Q&A button. This is found at the bottom of your screen and is different from the chat function. We invite you also to join in the conversation on social media using hashtag IDW2023, hashtag GoForTheGoals, and to tag OCIC on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. OCIC is committed to creating a safe and inclusive space. We ask that all participants commit to our code of conduct, which is inspired by those of the Intercouncil Network and Amnesty Canada. This code of conduct, which Arabelle is now putting in the chat, outlines our shared commitment to respect, inclusion, humility, safety, solidarity, patience, and openness for all participants and collaborators. If you see or experience anything in conflict with this code of conduct, please do not engage directly. Instead, please contact an organizer and we will respond appropriately. I would now like to share OCIC's land acknowledgement. OCIC recognizes and honors the Indigenous people who have historically and do presently live and work on the traditional, both treaty and unceded territories that we operate on. We acknowledge that our staff, board, volunteers, members, and broader community operate on the treaty and unceded territories of numerous Indigenous groups across Turtle Island. As we reflect on our role within a settler colonial context, we acknowledge the importance of naming the Indigenous peoples and nations on whose land we live, work, and play. And we understand the importance of framing our engagement in the international cooperation sector and beyond through this lens of reconciliation and decolonization. We recognize that we have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with Indigenous people who have and continue to fight for social justice on their own lands. Without further ado, I would like to welcome and introduce Canada's Ambassador for Climate Change, Catherine Stewart. With over 25 years in the federal government, Ambassador Stewart's most recent role was Assistant Deputy Minister of International Affairs at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Since 2014, she has served in senior executive roles at Environment and Climate Change Canada, including as Canada's Chief Negotiator for Climate Change, Director General, Multilateral Affairs and Climate Change, and Director General for the Americas. She has also worked on defense and security policy at the Development of National Defense over the span of a decade, covering areas such as cabinet affairs, ministerial speechwriting, and Canada's participation in the NATO alliance. It is now my pleasure to hand it over to the Ambassador for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for the kind invitation. And thank you very much to the Ontario Council for International Cooperation for inviting me here today to say a few words and to kick off your International Development Week events for 2023. I'm very delighted to be here. So today's session, Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation, Realities from Around the Globe, will feature some really interesting speakers from OCIC partners who will share their work in addressing climate and development issues. So I'm pleased to have the chance to speak about the international context in which Canada exists and some of the actions we are taking to make a difference. So you know as well as I do that climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time, and we really need to act now to protect our planet, to create a greener, more prosperous world now and for the future. And everybody needs to get involved. Young people, Indigenous people, private sector, NGOs, communities, we all need to come together to change the status quo and to really think outside of the box and to make changes in our community. The government of Canada believes that the success to fight climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution will hinge on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, as well as the full engagement and partnership with Indigenous peoples and integration of Indigenous knowledge and perspectives in a science and evidence-based approach. And so at the federal level, we strive to hold these principles true in our domestic and in our international actions. And I'd like to speak a little bit about those at turn. So on the domestic side, Canada is committed to both adaptation and mitigation efforts, and we have launched a number of domestic policies over recent years. I'll flag just a couple. The first one is the National Adaptation Strategy, which was released just before the end of the year. And that is a whole of society blueprint for a more coordinated and ambitious adaptation action. We also in 2021 introduced Net Zero Accountability Act, which now legislates the development of successfully more ambitious reduction plans towards a net zero future by 2050. And in 2030, and our 2030 emissions reductions plan came out in 2022, and that was the first of such plans. So these are really important pieces to deliver real change in Canada and to show our international partners, which is really important, that we are walking the talk. We cannot speak internationally without showing that we've done and we are doing and are committed to domestic action at home. So as Canada's ambassador for climate change, my mandate is to engage with international partners to advocate for climate ambition and to bring home lessons and best practices so that we can strengthen our own approach. And climate change, as you know, knows no borders. And Canada, as a developed country, has a responsibility to support less developed countries in their efforts. We know that international negotiations, primarily under the United Nations, can be a very powerful tool to get all governments to come together. And we also know that without mitigation, we won't be able to slow the current global climate warming, nor will we have the chance to stop before hitting crucial climate tipping points. At the recent COP28, the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change meeting, COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Canada advocated for concrete, strong, and practical outcomes on mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and climate finance. And we pushed really hard for outcomes on mitigation that went above and beyond commitments that we saw in Glasgow at COP26 in 2021. And we pushed for stronger commitments, for example, on emissions reductions needed to keep that 1.5 degrees alive. We pushed for an articulation of the important role of G20 countries, and we also pushed for the phase out of coal emissions and coal power. Adaptation action is also essential, which is why Canada supported the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program to advance collective work on adaptation action. And crucially, we also worked with all willing parties towards the establishment of new funding arrangements, including a new fund to support particularly the most vulnerable developing countries with loss and damage from the harms caused by anthropogenic climate change. And more personally, I attended both COP27 and COP15 in Montreal. I had the opportunity to engage with many different organizations, institutions, companies, individuals who are all taking climate and biodiversity action in their own communities. And similar to those of you participating in today's event, I cannot stress enough the importance of sharing your experiences to help inspire others to take action. So for instance, when I was at COP15 in Montreal, I learned about the Youth Leadership in Sustainability program, which is an innovative and experiential educational program housed out of Trent University in Peterborough that brings together grade 11 and grade 12 students in pursuing sustainability projects at the local and global levels. And hearing about the projects that these youth have implemented has truly inspired me. And this is just one of many examples of climate action that's taking place in local communities all over the world. So looking ahead to COP28 and the global stocktake, which is the process for parties to look at the status of how we're doing in implementing the Paris Agreement, I anticipate and I know that we will hear worrying news, that the gap between where we need to be in 2030 and where we are now is wide. And so as we develop our approach for COP28, Canada's engagement will continue to be inclusive and diverse and make sure many voices are at the table: Inuit, First Nation, Métis, LGBTQ2+, Canadians, youth, and civil society. And I can promise you that Canada will continue to push for more ambitious international action and seek stronger commitments from our partners in multilateral fora like the G7, the G20, in this critical decade of action. But I'd like to shift the focus just a little bit about another important issue that is linked to sustainable development, and that is climate finance. When we speak about climate action, we of course need to address the cost. The poorest and most vulnerable people, including in the global south, developing countries, indigenous communities, women and girls, are often at the front lines of climate change and often have less capacity to adapt to the impacts of climate change. That's why developed countries committed to mobilizing $100 billion a year in international climate finance for developing countries as soon as possible until and through to 2025. The urgency of the need for additional finance is why Canada doubled our international finance commitment from $2.65 to $5.3 billion between 2021 and 2026. And on top of doubling this commitment, we also recalibrated our climate finance to better address the needs from developing countries from what we were hearing. So following consultations, we increased our share of grants from 30% to 40%. We doubled our adaptation financing to 40%. We devoted 20% of our climate finance funds for energy transition and another 20% towards nature-based solutions. And we are ensuring that 80% of our projects will fully integrate gender equality into their work. So Canada has a tremendous array of projects and programs from our previous and current climate finance commitment that has helped to increase the resilience of communities to climate hazards and to help them reduce emissions and adapt to impacts. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So between 2011 and 2020, Canada provided $20 million for the Community Disaster Risk Reduction Program with the Caribbean Development Bank. And it funds projects, pilot projects, to identify effective prevention and mitigation measures, then implements them in 15 to 17 communities across the Caribbean. This included climate finance as well as international assistance funds. And then as part of Canada's $2.65 billion climate finance envelope in 2016, we provided $10 million to something called the Climate Risk and Early Warning Systems, or CREWS as it's called, to improve warning systems against climate hazards with a focus on small island developing states and least developed countries. And then at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Canada provided another $10 million from our $5.3 billion envelope towards this commitment. We also contribute to the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, of 340 million, and that aims to support climate smart agriculture in developing countries by promoting climate smart farming practices and technologies to support smallholder farmers, particularly women. So that's just a few examples of some of the projects that we've been doing with our climate finance. And it goes beyond the quantum of money, though. We work very closely with other countries in setting a new post-2025 climate finance goal. And we're also pushing to continue to make progress on access to financing, which we know continues to be an issue, and also to mobilize more private sector financing, increase financing on adaptation, push for more reform with our multilateral development banks so that this new climate finance goal can be effective. So you can learn more about our climate finance projects online, and I encourage you to see what we're doing. You can also find a report that Canada and Germany did called the Climate Finance Delivery Plan from COP26, and we did a progress report at COP27, which shows how we are doing on the $100 billion goal, as well as identifies those areas that I just spoke about where more work is required. But I think this year is one for optimism. We're starting to finally see international consensus around the links between climate and development. And this is notable in the climate-nature nexus. We know that a large percentage of the world's poorest and most vulnerable live in rural areas and rely on biodiversity for their livelihoods. During COP15 in Montreal in December, parties agreed to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This framework includes important links to shared climate and biodiversity action, as well as major commitments. By 2030, parties will aim to protect 30% of the Earth's lands, oceans, coastal areas, and inland waters, cut food waste in half, and reduce environmentally harmful subsidies by $500 billion annually. At COP15, Canada also announced $350 million to support developing countries' work to protect nature and biodiversity and support resilient local economies. We expect this work to have important climate benefits given the linkages between nature and climate. Alors, je suis ravie de voir à quel point vous êtes tous motivés.
I'm so happy to see the extent to which you are motivated and encouraged to be involved in a real climatic action. I salute your efforts, and I encourage you to continue to work with your colleagues and your government in order to contribute to the creation of a better world. I also exhort you to take part in any dialogue in decision-making circles, as well as to contribute to a cause that is appealing to you. Let's be creative, let's be brave, and let's put hand in hand in order to mobilize, to unleash our potential and benefit from all the opportunities that can help us improve our action and cause a real change. I thank you all for having given me the opportunity to address this meeting. I thank you for the invitation. I wish you best of luck, and I wish you a fruitful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Stewart, for your opening remarks and for outlining Canada's domestic and international achievements and ambitions relating to climate change mitigation, adaptation, and finance, as you've aptly noted. This is a very useful context to have as we now transition into our panel portion, where we will hear from experienced international cooperation actors on their projects and impacts in their local and global communities. I'd now like to move to introduce the moderator for today's panel, Ameena Ilahi. Ameena Ilahi has over 20 years' experience in international development with a strong focus on the nonprofit sector. She is currently the Executive Director of Rooftops Canada. Previously, she has served as the Country Director for Relief International Pakistan, Assistant Country Director with CARE International in Pakistan, and the Deputy Country Representative with the Asia Foundation, where she led its human rights and women's empowerment programs. With over 15 years in the field, Ameena brings sound understanding of complex and fragile settings in the global south and countries in transition, including Pakistan, Egypt, Romania, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Ameena has worked in varied development sectors, including human rights, women's economic empowerment, good governance and democratization, agriculture, and much more. She holds a BA in Sociology and Anthropology from Carleton University in Ottawa, and also an MSc in Agricultural Development from the University of London in the United Kingdom. It is now my great pleasure to hand it over to Ameena to moderate today's panel.
Thank you for the introduction, Elizabeth, and thank you, the ambassador, for her opening remarks. They resonate so much with what my own experience has been in Pakistan. My name is Ameena Ilahi, and I am the Executive Director of Rooftops Canada, Abri International, a Canadian nonprofit, non-governmental organization that helps families in the Global South secure affordable housing in sustainable communities. I'm honored to have been invited by OCIC to moderate today's session on climate change mitigation and adaptation, realities from across the globe. This session resonates closely with my own experiences from living and working in Pakistan over the past 17 years. As you know, Pakistan faces some of the highest disaster calamities in the world. While I was in Pakistan, I witnessed firsthand the widespread death and destruction of entire communities due to flooding, droughts, and tropical cyclones. The floods of 2022 were unprecedented in Pakistan's history, affecting close to 50 million inhabitants, displacing thousands of families, inundating agricultural land, and killing livestock. This flooding caused $30 billion in economic losses and will take years for the country to rebuild and recover from this disaster. Pakistan is not in itself responsible for these climate impacts. Rather, it is the environmental practices of wealthier nations for which nations like Pakistan bear the brunt. In a historic decision at the most recent United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as COP27, Pakistan demanded retribution for losses incurred as a result of climate effects and received a fund for loss and damages by member countries, which I'm very, very pleased about. I'm excited to be here to learn from our distinguished colleagues on their experiences on this topic. Panelists will speak in both English and French, and translation services are available. Let me now take the opportunity to introduce the panel members. We have with us Demba Coundoul, who is the Director of Programs with Goodall Institute, Senegal, since 2020. He has more than 15 years of experience in administrative, financial, and human resources management in organizations in Senegal and Europe. He brings his experience in local development and women's economic group support in the BCR project. We also have with us Sonya Santolin. She's the Director, Governance and Board Secretary at Firefighters Without Borders. Sonya is a qualified corporate lawyer, member of the Ontario Bar Association, and has experience supporting several international boards. She is experienced in corporate law, corporate governance and sustainability, and corporate and regulatory compliance. Sonya was elected to the board in September 2019 as a board secretary and chair of the Governance and Nominating Committee. To get us started, please, if I may ask, if you can introduce yourselves in your own way and give a high-level overview of what your organization and project does that is relevant to our topic today. May I hand this over to you, Demba, to begin?
Merci, bonjour à tout le monde.
Thank you. Hello to you all. I'm Demba Coundoul. As Ameena mentioned just now, there, that's my little bio. I am Director of Programs at the Jane Goodall Institute of Senegal. The Jane Goodall Institute, as the name indicates, it was created by Madam Jane Goodall. It's in 30 countries worldwide. The Jane Goodall Institute of Senegal is in collaboration with the one in Canada and Spain, working in the Kirgu region. Could you put the slide up, please, to explain where we are working? There we are. So the Institute has 4 programs that we first start with research on chimpanzees. And chimpanzees, I would remind that they only exist in Kirgu. It's 730 kilometers from Dakar. It's a subspecies. It's a critically endangered subspecies that we're seeking to protect. With lots of research and lots of biomonitoring. There's also conservation, reforestation, to meet, to go to the ambassador's ideas on climate change. We also do environmental education called Roots and Shoots, also known as Dari and Fudi locally, for the local language. It's environmental education with youth, students, and adolescents to teach them what is the environment, what are the climate impacts, what are the impacts of climate change. And fourth, there's a program financed by Global Affairs Canada on sustainable development and climate change adaptation. Slide 2, please. Slide 2, please. Can we see slide 2, please? Here we are. The Institute is present on this map. And on that map, you see the Institute is present in 4 municipalities in Kirgu rather. It shares a border with Guinea and Mali as well. We are present in 21 villages in these 4 municipalities. And this project, well, the map shows the intervention of the project on climate change mitigation. Slide 3, please. Slide 3. There we are. So, as part of this program, we see some images of our activities that are the climate change mitigation projects. On the hand of that person, that's what we call Funyu. That's where we support. Well, I would say 975 people who have benefited from it for the Funyu. It's support them post harvest. This is part of the process of climate change. We've also administrated a new activity called bio-coal, charcoal, called Demba. This bio-charcoal has also let us offered an alternative to charcoal that is formerly prohibited in Kirgu. And putting this, when people make this charcoal, it leads to deforestation and leads to rain issues. It also affects drying effects that are a real problem in the Kirgu region. We mentioned 44 brush fire that completely devastate nature. And you see in the image this woman in the yellow who is preparing what we call parfait. These are awareness raising activities on fighting brush fires. So this is basically what the Institute is doing in the Kirgu region, and this is related to climate change, it's related to economic development, and it's also related to, I think the photos, I'll come back to them more clearly in terms of our activities that we do on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Demba. May I ask Sonya the same question, please? If if you can please introduce yourself in your own way and give a high-level overview of what your organization and project does, very briefly.
Yes, hi. Hello to everyone. I'm here today representing Firefighters Without Borders. We are a not-for-profit organization and charity, and I serve on the board of directors as the board secretary and chairperson for the nominating and governance committee. You heard in my bio a little bit about my background. I returned to Canada in 2019, having lived overseas for the previous 19 years. And when I returned to Canada, I wanted to get involved in the community because I wasn't able to easily do that while overseas. And I found Firefighters Without Borders looking for a new director, and I'm thrilled that I was able to join such a great organization. Firefighters Without Borders is a purely volunteer organization with domestic and international tentacles. It is serviced by a combination of firefighters and non-firefighter volunteers. And the volunteers serve both at the board level and on the ground, whether it's in terms of, helping out with things like equipment sorting or traveling overseas to our partner countries to deliver training on equipment use, on safety, rescue, et cetera. So, we have partnerships with multiple countries. I know that the ambassador mentioned the importance of supporting the poorest communities, and certainly most of our work is with developing nations, and we conduct risk assessment and needs assessments before going in to really understand the nature of the requirements and whether we can service them, and also the level of financial support that we are required to contribute and that we can contribute to make the projects feasible for them. So that's a little bit about our organization, and I'm sure I'll be addressing some of the other questions as we go in this presentation.
Yes.
Thank you both, Demba and Sonya, for your introduction. If I may move on to the second question, I'd just like to remind everyone to please go ahead and start populating the question and answer icon. It's available at the bottom of your screen there. You can start putting in your questions, and we'll get to them at either as we go along in our presentation or towards the end. Let's move on to the second question, if I may. Let's start with Sonya, where you left off. How do you work with and engage local communities in your projects? How have you seen your communities impacted by climate change and or work that your project does?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. So as I mentioned, we have projects internationally and domestically. So I'll start first within Canada. Within Canada, we have partnered with several First Nations communities. And the type of work that we've done has really been around fire prevention and training, equipment donations as well, and training using a train the trainers model, so that one of our values is around sustainability, but not in the climate change sense of the word, more in the sense of the old line, give a person a fish and they eat once, train them to fish and they eat for a lifetime. So that's the kind of model that we adopt, and we really try and help our partner members become sustainable on their own 2 feet. So within Canada, as I said, we have several First Nation community partnerships. And a lot of our work, not for any specific reason, but it's, I guess, where the need really is, and where people have found us is in the Caribbean. So we have had a lot of projects, and South America. So we've had projects in Bolivia, in Honduras, in the Bahamas. That's a new project we're working on. Saint Lucia, Paraguay. We had a project recently in Lebanon, and the way that these projects come to us, as I said, is through some of the events that we organize. So we're part of the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs, and we spread our mission at all the events, and we have one-on-one meetings, and we make the firefighter departments across Canada aware of our mission, so that when their equipment is nearing the end of its life, they donate to us, and we're able then to reuse it and support other communities. And we also, through this model, get volunteers joining us to actually go on the ground and deliver the training and do the outreach that's needed. So on a local level, and international level, as I said, we work really with volunteers, and that's, how we are able to stay doing what we're doing. And we engage with our volunteers through some of the activities that I've mentioned previously, which is, the day-to-day functionings that we have around equipment and the on-the-ground training. We're also looking to expand our volunteer base. We're currently looking for a volunteer coordinator to help us build that out a bit more, because that is one of the vulnerable areas in a not-for-profit, is not having enough manpower to be able to not only do the basics, but also expand, because we receive a lot of requests, and some of which we just don't have the bandwidth to address. Within the actual partner communities, because we're working on a train-the-trainer basis, and each of our projects is a little bit different, so I can't say that every project is handled the same way, but we work with our partners to engage their community. So, for example, I mentioned Bahamas being a new project that we're undertaking right at the moment. We sent two of our directors down, during a time when Bahamas was, the Bahamas Governor's Harbor was they had just received a new fire truck, and so they held a local event and brought in the community. So really, it's really grassroots kind of engagement that we do. Sorry, I'm not sure if I answered the entire question there. If I've missed something, please let me know.
Thank you, Sonya. May I now turn to
je passe maintenant à Demba.
Demba for the same question. Yes. If you like, I can repeat the question. How do you work with...
Si vous pouvez répéter, même si je ne l'ai pas en face de moi.
Yes, if you could repeat the question, it would be really great. I don't quite have it in front of me right now.
The question is, how do you work with and engage local communities in your projects? How have you seen your communities impacted by climate change and or the work that your project does? Over to you, Demba.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'd like to remind you that the project was conceptualized in a participatory way with local communities. Intervening, first of all, you have to go see the population to understand and evaluate, assess their expectations, and assess what the realities on the ground, what's doing well and not going well, and listen to them. The concept that we launched is to make them understand that they're participants in the project. They don't just benefit from the project, and the beneficiary they expect something. But if you're a participant, you have to bring something to the project. So the institute works in the Kirigu region, but more specifically, let's talk about research on chimpanzees. We have a biological station in Dendifigolo, that's 35 kilometers from the Kirigu region. Based on out of that biological station, there's a team. I do believe it's 17 people that coordinates everything related to research, conservation related to chimpanzees, and there's also a 5 to 6 person team who do agroforestry. They have places where they start to grow trees, and we have also communities for reforestation. They organize reforestation days each year, also awareness raising days, and we have succeeded. Outside of those reforestation efforts, there's another project that's financed by Global Affairs Canada that is based on prevention and training on the fight against brush fires. And we have raised awareness in 21 villages and created committees to fight against forest brush fires. We have at least 40 people in each committee. It's a really significant number of people for 21 villages. We also sought the participation of women and youth who support this project, and we've equipped those committees for the fight against brush fires. If there's an emergency, it's the committee handles it directly on the ground, handles brush fires directly on the ground. The other aspect that is related to mitigating the impacts of climate change, how we invited the public to support this project. We supported women, first of all. I would remind that Fonyo is this is only grown by women. It's subsistence agriculture.
So
we also supported women, first of all, by providing
programs as well, agricultures aiming at ensuring livelihoods. And once these crops are cultivated, we work on the transformation. Another part is destined to marketing, and we are helping as well women with providing instruments and tools, agricultural tools. And I believe that the objective of this project is to cover 26 participants, but right now we have exceeded 1,500 beneficiaries who are committed to engage in this project. We also, when it comes to protection and conservation or preservation and environment, we are seeking alternative solutions when it comes to wildfire, to prevent deforestation, to limit the negative consequences of different activities on forests. And we are producing a call from hay, and we are working with a number of villages, and right now we have trained 200, or until now we have trained 200 persons. Today, even women are predominant, but we're trying to seek a certain equality, and we are trying to urge people to prevent, or persons to prevent from cutting trees, to produce this kind of coal that will be marketed and sold. And third, we have accompanied beneficiaries in the management of natural resources. As I mentioned, we are providing training on the prevention and preservation. And here, when it comes to the management of natural resources, we could collaborate with the state entities responsible for natural resources, and we could organize 21 workshops of awareness raising and other activities on wildfires. And the peak of our intervention is related to the gender aspect, which was in the beginning very difficult because we're dealing with indigenous communities who are heavily reliant on agriculture. We had first to understand what's happening on the ground with these communities, with investigations or research at the qualitative and quantitative levels in order to understand the main challenge and the main aspects that need to be addressed. And we needed first also to train the project team to have people really master the questions of gender. So we trained our team on these concepts, and this allowed us to have a gateway to communities to explain the gender questions, and then we talked about the possibility of transfer or teach this concept. Why not train community leaders? We're talking about the imam, who represents the religious aspect of leadership. There's also the sort of administrative leader of the community. There's also women who are responsible for all activities related to women themselves, and there's also those who are responsible for the youth. So within these 21 villages, we could train 5 community leaders, and in total 105 leaders who will be responsible of disseminating this concept of gender at the community level. So if I'm not mistaken, with the statistics and figures that I have, we have 325 women and around 500 men beneficiaries. Of course, there are cultural aspects that are at play here, and we tried as much as we could to push forward this concept, and we convinced our target communities that they are participants, they are contributors, not beneficiaries. I believe that I've answered most of the question.
Yes. No, thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive answer. If I can just go back and get clarification on the impact that climate change has had on the communities, especially from Demba. How has climate change impacted the communities in which you're working, particularly vulnerable communities, and how has what has been their specific mitigation strategies? I believe what you're talking about is sort of the response or prevention of climate change impacts. But I'm very curious to know what the impact has been so far on those communities where you work. Demba, please.
Oui, merci, parce que en fait, au départ, on n'avait pas trouvé des
In the
alternatives.
beginning, we didn't find alternatives. I'm saying the truth here. But then, according to a participative approach, the communities helped us improve the project, understand the intervention axes and areas in order to help communities to induce the changes and take advantage of what's happening as a result of the climate change. So the priority first for us was to know how to manage nature or biodiversity, and based on that, we have prioritized awareness raising of communities about the negative consequences of deforestation, of wildfires, and the abusive or over exploitation of the natural resources, the fauna and the flora. So the implementation of the law is in the hands of the state, of the government. We worked with the state authorities, the water and the forest agency, and this agency helped us raise awareness within the targeted villages, and also implement practical trainings to allow these communities to face and address the problems of wildfires, to address the problem of overexploitation of forests. And in order to protect the forests, as I already said, our institute has experience in forestation. Of course, there are certain periods that are really better for reforestation, and that's what we focused on. The institute, by providing plans, could integrate the main regions in order to carry out the reforestation work. The animals also benefit from these actions, especially the chimpanzees and other species. So we have 2,500 chimpanzees, and if these chimpanzees do not find what to eat in Senegal, they will migrate to other areas.
Thank you. Thank you. No, that's wonderful to hear from the Jane Goodall Institute. Let me move on to Sonya. You have a question from the audience. The question is, can you speak a little bit more about how you went about creating partnerships with First Nations? Did they approach you, or did you take a more proactive approach?
Yeah, sure. Just before I answer that question, though, let me speak a little bit about our impact. So I think when you look at climate change, if you look at it from a risk management perspective, when you manage a risk, you either have prevention, mitigation, or adaptation. And we've been hearing a lot about mitigation and adaptation. As an organization, we aim to prevent some of the impacts of climate change on the communities. And because we work with developing nations who often are on the poor end of the scale, the need is greater for them because they're lacking equipment, they're lacking education, they're lacking know-how, they just don't have the resources available. And so our way of contributing to the solution is through the prevention angle, by equipping them and training, on the spot training. So, in terms of the impact on the community itself, we don't have concrete numbers other than to say when we go in, just by way of an example, we had one project where we went in, we trained 20, and by the end, there were hundreds that had been trained because the information had been passed on. And likewise, one of our projects in St. Lucia is really, the goal is to turn it into a regional hub so that other communities within the Caribbean can benefit from the development that's being done in St. Lucia. So, we really do look to expand our outreach as much as possible. So it's an indirect way of contributing to the climate change issue. In terms of the question, most of our partnerships come about as a response. So in the initial stages, I think in the very early days, this was before my time, there was a proactive attempt by Firefighters Without Borders to reach out to one of the communities. But since then, it's really been word of mouth, and we receive the requests from the potential partner. In the case of First Nations, there was a little bit more of a link because several of our directors, as I mentioned, are firefighters, so they are already connected with other firefighting locale. And so there was a connection with one of the First Nations communities, but it was them approaching us. It wasn't us going out looking to specifically partner with the community in itself. I don't know if that answers the question, or if the person, I think, Anne, if you had anything else you wanted to know about that. We do have a write-up in general on our website if you're interested to find out anything about our projects. You're more than welcome to contact us and ask questions directly, or even volunteer.
Thank you, Sonya. If there's any follow-up questions from Anne or anybody else from our audience, please type them into the question and answer session. Can I ask another question from from the audience? This is for Demba. It says, "Thank you, Demba. How does Jane Goodall balance conservation needs of chimpanzees and livelihood needs of people? How are these needs complementary?"
Alors, merci. En fait,
Thank you so much. This connection between the communities and the chimpanzee has been identified very early on. So first we have a team on biomonitoring, targeting chimpanzees to know where they are, what they do, what are their needs, and we even identify where they are settled. So if we notice that these chimpanzees are at a certain point, first we raise awareness among the community about these chimpanzees, what are their needs in terms of food, and what are their habits. And then what should we do in order to protect these chimpanzees in terms of from a biodiversity perspective, from a prevention perspective. And we have teams that go on tours to collect data and conduct further studies on chimpanzees. So when it comes to environment, the Institute has supported the community to create a reserve that covers 14 hectares to protect chimpanzees and other species as well. However, so here within this reserve, we have prevented or banned any human activities that interferes with the chimpanzees and would push the chimpanzees away. So we are accompanying chimpanzees. We have already done reforestation work, and when it comes to the communities, how do we compensate them for this loss? The communities had the habit of collecting the fruits, gathering the fruits, etc. And also because we have areas where chimpanzees are settled, are active, we have raised the awareness, the communities about these hubs. We accompanied the communities at different stages and different activities, marketing, collection of fruits, etc., in order to protect chimpanzees. So most of the communities know that if we have the projects of mitigations, that's because we have chimpanzee presence at the Goodall region. So we have a good nexus between environment, chimpanzees, communities. The linkages are clear and everything is going smoothly between these three elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I will just take one more question before we move on to further in the session. This is for either Sonya or Demba. Perhaps Demba has already touched a little bit on this, so perhaps over to you, Sonya, which is how do you think gender equality can mitigate climate change risks? How has been your experience in this regard and impact measurement in this regard with your projects?
Yeah, so I think for us, I'm not sure quite how to answer this question, because firefighting does tend to be a very male-oriented endeavor. Although, when we look at our board, we have two female board directors who are from the firefighting community. So we are seeing, a lot of, so when we look at our board, I'd say about half of us are male and half are female, which is a great balance. And then, as I said, two come specifically from the firefighting community. So in terms of, promoting or addressing gender equality issues, that's not really the kind of work that we do. I guess it's done indirectly through our activities because it really depends on the community we're working with.
Yes.
I can't speak to.
Yes, as I understood, Firefighters is a volunteer organization, so you're depending on the volunteers regardless of their gender. But is there an outreach campaign within Firefighters to target more female volunteers to join? And are there programs that target specific trainings in overseas countries where you're present to have more female trained on some of the prevention methods that you talked about?
Yeah, so at this point, I'd say the answer is no. Again, a lot of it is contingent on, the resources that we have available. And I made reference earlier that for us to continue, because we are volunteer based, we need bodies. And we are, as I said earlier, currently looking for a volunteer coordinator. So, if we're able to bring a volunteer coordinator on board, then that is an area that we can look to develop out. We don't have the capacity at this time. So, it's kind of a catch-22. Likewise, in terms of measuring the impact of our activities on climate change in the communities, that is a project that we are looking into developing. Again, within the bandwidth that we have, it's a nice to have. It's a wish that we have, and we're trying to move forward on. We haven't been able to do anything yet, again, because of bandwidth. So, we really encourage volunteers to join us and help us grow and spread the message and our mission and our impact on gender equality and other equality.
Thank you. Demba, would you like to respond to that very briefly? The question regarding gender equality, how do you think gender equality can mitigate climate change risks? Before we move on to question 3. Demba?
Alors, excusez-moi.
Sorry about that. I think I answered this question earlier with the gender aspect was something that we really promoted in terms of how we intervene.
Yes.
Speaking of climate change, speaking of resilience as well, this has to be accompanied by gender equality. And I had explained that we have trained community leaders. And this is how you come into to introduce gender equality into communities. With the tradition, the person who has the voice is the village chief. That's how you enter into the village. He's the chief of everybody. There's also the imam or the bishop who passes on messages, religious messages. If those two people, in addition to the people responsible for women and youth, the concept can pass on. We have succeeded with the gender concept to train the team, to train community leaders, but also do 6 workshops where we only speak of gender as it relates to community. Now it's a process where we're doing more efforts in the communities to speak of gender themes. And it's based on those themes that we were able to see some commitment in terms of decision making and responsibility and commitment for development activities from a large part of men and women. At the start, it was impossible to speak in the community. Who's going to make the decision? If you ask the question, you may see a major problem. But now, the community understood how when you make a decision, men and women have to be involved.
Yes.
It's not just men taking the decision, not just women making decisions.
That's a community approach. Yes. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on. Public engagement is a key element of international cooperation and solidarity efforts in Canada and globally. With so many issues to care about in the world, how do you engage others to be involved in your work? And how can our audience today support your
Okay.
efforts immediately or in the long term?
Alors, merci. Je pense que
Thank
merci.
you. Commitment, public engagement. I will explain it. We have a project that is managed, first of all. It's a project, but to make sure that the project goes forward, we need to involve the stakeholders involved in sustainability. We started by creating a pilot committee for the project. And based on that steering committee, there's state actors, yes. The governor, first of all, he's the chief of the region, supported by the two prefects who are departmental heads. They manage all the departments for the government. And now also the mayors of local communities come in to play. This is involves local communities, of course, and state technical services as well. So let's say it were to end, the state could continue to make it sustainable. I also think that, secondly, we also have to involve the public. How do we involve the public? We have to show the people who are benefiting from it, we call them participants, that you're at the heart of the project. You have something to say about the project. You should be supporting the project because the project, it benefits you. And it is from the start to the as we make the project and have it sustainable, you have to be involved. And we submit a report to all the members of the steering committee. We convene a meeting among them to exchange what we've achieved and perspectives on that project. We don't want to come with the model where the funder said, okay, there's our indicators, there's our activities, we'll just execute them. We need some exchange in terms of what achievements and perspectives and recommendations as well. We should do this on our end too. We should do things for common success and shared success. I've participated in so many meetings in terms of validating the data for the department. It's what we call it SNCC Day here. I also participated in SARDE, regional development committees related to environment, economic development, gender, climate change as well. I have participated in many meetings on that front where the project normally gives its ideas, and we also receive state reports so that we can make input for recommendations as they relate to our activities. So why wouldn't you put in such and such an aspect? Because it should also support climate change. The last meeting was to validate the strategic plan for allies in terms of achievements on the ground, where I spoke to climate change and the gender aspects related to climate change. The governor had felt the need that the institute supports the technical services as well, as regards the material equipment to the fight against brush fires and training. And we held fast to our commitments. I'd like to say a little something about the Firemen Without Firefighters Without Borders. The governor asked if there's a partner who can support the firefighting service in Kirigou in terms of training and equipment. When there's a brush fire, the communities react, well, the firefighters have to handle this. But the forest fighters have to prevention of brush fires. But firefighters are for accidents, but not brush fires. I said, okay, we're doing a panel. It's a chance to speak to Firefighters Without Borders. The firefighters in Kirigou are extending their hand. They would love some training and equipment and support. This is what I have to say in terms of public engagement.
Thank you, Demba. I think there's some room for collaboration. Let me let you respond to that, Sonya, hearing what Demba had said about public engagement and possibly a partnership. But perhaps you'd like to talk specifically on Firefighters Without Borders and their role in public engagement and what you would like to see today. How can our audience today support your efforts immediately or in the long term?
D'abord, merci, Demba. Ça sera plaisir.
Thank you, Demba. It's a pleasure to speak to you more on this front.
Public engagement. I was thinking there are a number of different ways that we engage. So as I said, with our partners in their communities, we engage by way of, on-site visits, activities, training, financial support. Each of our projects tend to last anywhere from a year to multiple years. So the level of engagement varies over the course of time. We also have strategic partners that we work with who provide services to us and enable us to do further engagement. So I mentioned earlier, for example, the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs is one of the core resources through which we engage with the firefighting community to make ourselves known and to be able to obtain the resources, physical resources that we need in order to thrive. We've also done partnerships with KESO. One of our key partners is the Metro Supply Chain Group, who provides us with warehouse space and shipping support. So we have a number of partnerships, and it's usually through them that we engage, but we also engage, as I said previously, through our volunteer efforts. And that, I think, I cannot underline that enough in our call today, that, without volunteers, we do not exist. The other way I think that our audience members can support is through donations. We're with Canada Helps, and every little dollar helps, hence the name Canada Helps. And the reason that I make this pledge is because when we partner with communities, as I said, a lot of them are developing countries. And so just by way of an example, we have an ongoing relationship with St. Lucia, which we're trying to create a regional hub, a training hub, and they've undergone various budget, shrinkage over the years, and as a result, the project has been vulnerable. And so we want to step in and be able to fill that gap financially, and in order to continue this project, which is, regionally important. And so we work on developing grants. We work with, getting donations and sponsorships with corporate entities. But that is a big element as well of how we're able to carry on. So if anyone's interested, just visit our website. There's a donate page that can help you set up a payment one time or recurring. Those are probably the two best ways, are through volunteering and financial support.
Yes, thank you. Are there any other questions that our audience would like to know from our panelists? I don't see any. Okay. Then I guess this session will come to a close. I am very, very grateful for our panelists, Demba and Sonya, as well as the ambassador. I think the remarks about the urgency in which we need to address climate change is very, very important. We need to act together and take a multi-sectoral approach, not just focusing on the communities where we work with, but in partnerships with the with government agencies as well. Also, I think that we do need to take a very localized approach. So localization and feminist approaches are perhaps the two main elements in addressing climate change impacts particularly in the global south, where most of our partners are working. And on to Sonia's point about really focusing on prevention before we focus on mitigation and adaptation. It's a very great challenge that we have at our hands right now. And sometimes I wonder if we are already too late in the process to do something about it, but I guess it's never too late. We need to start somewhere, and we need to have a very proactive approach. Let me do a final check in the chat box to see if there's any further comments. I don't see any new ones. Let's see. Sorry. One question came separately. This is for Demba. Demba, if you can respond to a question from one of our panelists, from our audience, where you envision the project going and developing in the future.
Alors, normalement,
So, normally our project should end February 2024 or 25. It's been extended by a year to finalize the project. Now, after that, who will assure that it's sustainable? It's the objective at the start was what? If you don't put the state services as part of this project, there will be no follow-up. So if the state does understand the achievements, the state can continue the project. But I explained it earlier. We have a follow-up committee, a local committee. It's not a national committee, it's a local committee. The governor is the chair of that committee. We usually meet on, we should be meeting on February 28th to do the evaluation of the execution of the project. What will be the commitment of the state to support that project? We've already we're already working with the state to establish their responsibilities and our responsibilities. Who has to do what? Who has to report? We have respected our obligations. We submit a report to the state each quarter. We submit this report to this report to the state. In terms of the follow-up of the project, to continue this project, internally, we're going to try to see with the team what are the possibilities in terms of the community expectations. Is there a possibility of continuing to support the community in terms of climate change? We have launched this. Imagine that you've targeted roughly 500 beneficiaries, and now it's 1,500 beneficiaries. Expectations are huge, and commitment of the community is huge. Frankly, the challenge, what we realize, most of the testimonials we've received, the communities will say it's the first time that we've seen a project that involves a community in how the project's executed, that is listening to the community in terms of how it's executed. It's the first time. I have lots of video testimonials and in writing too that indicate how proud people are of this project. The state has really well understood what we're doing locally. That's why we don't have any challenges organizing activities. Well, recently we're building some things. We're already we've ordered some machines from Mali. This indicates the confidence and the commitment of the public and the state. AMC came to visit us in Coundoul on January 9. We showed them what we've achieved.
Yes.
We gave them a chance to hear the public and the community. And I said, you can ask them questions. You can ask the community directly. I don't want to answer for the community.
Yes.
To get good testimonials in terms of what we're doing. If I speak, I'll cover up. The community has to explain, express itself to say if what concretely has happened.
Yes.
So it's the participatory approach with the community.
No doubt, no doubt. Thank you very much. Just one final question for both Sonya and Demba. Are there any final calls for action that your community partners would most want us to take away from today's session? Any calls of action that you want us, the community members, to take away? Sonya, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, I can't speak on behalf of the community partners directly, but I think that, if we're focused on climate change, it's a global problem. And I think that a global solution is what community partners would say. And so, when we look at the kind of work that Firefighters Without Borders does, we're very fortunate because we come from a country of haves, and we're able to therefore give to other countries in need. And so I think that there's a need for collaboration. There's a need for this global coming together and supporting those who are in need. I mean, that would be probably the call for action that I would say is that there needs to be a collaborative effort brought to play, not only with countries, but also at individual, corporate, government levels. It really is it behooves everyone to get involved in solving the needs of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, I would agree. I have, as I mentioned earlier, experience from Pakistan, and in that context, I can understand the need for very strong advocacy both at the national and local levels, because there is such a lack of understanding of the impact of climate change on the country's future, and I think it just cannot be ignored any further. I think with that, let me hand over to Elizabeth to conclude this session. I want to thank you, Demba and Sonya, for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I think our audience has had a chance to learn a little bit about your organizations and the efforts on the ground in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation. So thank you. With that, I will now hand this over to Elizabeth for her concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Ameena, Demba, and Sonya, for your insight and your expertise. It has been such an honor to hear from you, to learn from you this afternoon, and to really be able to take what you said and think about it kind of in more of a global context. We really appreciate it. I'll now invite everyone to please complete the short Zoom poll that should be launching on your screen. While you complete this poll, I would just like to draw your attention to some other events that are happening throughout International Development Week. Next Saturday, February 11th, we will be having our in-person Innovation Lab that builds on today's event. We are also hosting 2 more virtual panels. On Monday, February the 6th, we have our Career Journeys in International Cooperation panel. And on Wednesday, February 8th, we have our Demystifying the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda panel. You can learn more and register for these events on our website, which has just been posted in the chat. Once again, I would like to offer sincere thanks to the ambassador for her remarks and to Ameena, Sonya, and Demba for sharing their wisdom again with us. I'd also like to thank Arabelle, Sarah, Pragya, Lisa, and Kim from the OCIC team for all of their efforts, as well as our interpreters and interpretation support, Lamis, Andre, Tamber, and Ernest from MCIS Language Solutions. Finally, I'd like to thank Global Affairs Canada and our colleagues in the Engaging Canadians branch for their financial and logistical support for this and all of our International Development Week initiatives. Thank you again, everyone, for attending this afternoon. We hope to see you at our other IDW events.